Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Fantasy Friday. So, last week we read two chapters of The Tiger and the Wolf, and some interesting things happened. Maniye escaped with Hesprick, but Hesprick ended up dying, unfortunately. So, that didn't work out terribly well, although, well, at least she got him free. And so he was able to die in his serpent form and not in his human form. As we know, that is something that they all try to avoid so that their souls can go and rest in peace and be reborn later on. Now, when we left off, also, Manny was feeling quite weak because her souls are battling within her and she can't really move or do anything. So Broken Axe, who has now shown some sort of loyalty to her, is off trying to get help. And that's where we pick up now. So let's see what happens as we start with chapter 37. She heard wolves calling as she crouched there. Not close, but not as far away as she would have wished. The tigers she did not hear, nor expected to. Slowly her two souls slunk back to her, their powers seeping grudgingly back into her limbs. She did not try to step, in case playing favorites with them might trigger another rebellion. Denied their animal senses, she felt blind. There could be enemies all around, and she could not scent them. But then Broken Axe was back, far sooner than he should have been, and not alone. She leapt up, knowing instantly that he could not have found Loud Thunder in such a short span. Her body was flooded with the need to fight or flee. He had found other allies, though. He had come with the Southerners. "They were on my trail," he told her. "The girl here, she tracks like a wolf." The plainswoman made a scoffing sound at that. "Can you run?" Axe asked. It seemed to be the question that her life revolved around. She did not know the answer, but she replied, "I can." "Make for Loud Thunder's home," he told her. "I will run ahead to alert him. Perhaps the bear will give us guest rights." And Asmander inquired, "Where is the messenger?" It was a yawning moment before she realized who he meant. Saying the words opened up the wounds again. "He is dead." The champion stared at her. "I took him from the winter runners," she said in a whisper. "But he was hurt, and then the cold. I'm sorry." She was not quite sure of the relationship between Hesprick and this man. They had not been old friends from before, but the black youth had shown the old priest immediate and unquestioning respect. She was very aware of how little she knew any of these Southerners. The news had struck Asmander like a hammer. "A messenger of the serpent? Dead?" He got out. Many wanted to remind him that Hesprick had been old. She had wanted to say how he had seemed at peace. The words would not come, though, and she doubted that they would have helped. "We must," Broken Axe started, but Asmander wandered off a few steps, unsteady on his legs. Maniye looked at the other two. The southern girl was grimacing, a spectator to someone else's awkwardness, but when she met Maniye's gaze, she just shrugged. The other man, the big one with the long hair, seemed blithely unconcerned. Broken Axe approached Asmander. "What will you do?" he asked. "Where does this leave you?" His clenched fists alone showed how aware he was of the valuable time lost. "I don't know," the champion said, and then, "It leaves me with my duty." He did not sound glad about it. "Why can the girl not run with you?" Broken Axe frowned. "It is her souls." For a second, Asmander just stared at him blankly before understanding dawned. "One must be cut away. The messenger could have done that." "I could do it," Broken Axe said tersely. "But first she needs to choose." "Why not the wolf?" "What do you know about it?" Axe asked sharply. "She grew up a wolf, did she not? And you are a wolf. There is no tiger here. She respects you." The hunter scowled. "Normally this is easy. Normally there is the soul that speaks of home, and one that speaks of the other. but many tracks, the jaws of the wolf, the claws of the tiger. Each is as unkind as the last. He took a deep breath, glancing over at Maniye. Southerner, where do you stand now? A flurry of conflicting thoughts passed across Asmander's dark face, but they were written in the fashion of his river nation, and Maniye could read none of them. Don't ask me this, he replied hollowly. I ask you to do what you believe is right, Broken Axe said simply. I would value your help, if you will offer it. Asmander's expression was eaten up by something that Maniye could not quite discern. His big friend made a derisive noise. Wolf, this is no business of ours. Keep your girl and your tigers and your piss cold north. Broken Axe nodded once. I understand, he said, but then Asmander held a hand up. We will go with her, he declared, to the obvious surprise of his fellows. Why? Maniye thought. Just because of Hesprick? Does he owe me that much purely because Hesprick valued me? Thank you. Broken Axe clapped his hand on Asmander's shoulder, making the Southerners shy away from him. She will show you the way, and I will be with you, with help, as soon as I can bring it. But will they help? Maniye asked. The bear, will they even care? She felt far too fragile to have so much of the world concerned about her fate. The weight of it was crushing. Broken Axe's face showed that he had no such certainty, but a moment later he was back on 4 feet and dashing away, vanishing into the trees in a moment. What's she good for, anyway? Venator demanded. Right now, the only use for her that I can see is as lunch when our food runs out. Enough! Asmander kept his eyes on the girl ahead, because she didn't seem at all as sure of where she was going as she had claimed. She hadn't stepped either, trusting neither of her souls. He guessed that mere human senses were inadequate to the task of navigation. Enough! Growled the old pirate behind him. The first son of Asman has a duty to his father, and yet here he is up in the cold north, helping orphans. She's not! I don't care! Her parentage is like those knots your snake priests tie, that nobody can undo. So why is it our problem? All of this certainly loud enough for Maniye to hear. It's our problem because the first son of Asman told Broken Axe we would do this. Asmander snapped back at him. I am your only problem, Venator. You've got one thing right, then. The man spat disgustedly. When his voice was stilled, Asmander found that he missed it. Snarling with Venator had at least kept his mind busy and not asking itself the same question. Why are you really doing this? Going near that question was like touching a raw wound. Broken Axe will be back soon, he reassured himself. Then I will not have to make the choice of what to do. They were making poor time at the girl's plodding pace. Unless she trusts herself to step, a 3-legged wolf would catch us, Asmander thought. Shiri was bored. She sauntered past Asmander on 4 feet, hackles high, and then stepped right next to Maniye, making the girl start. So, she said, chewing at a piece of gristle, Broken Axe. What of him? Maniye mumbled. You and he, the laughing girl continued. He's your mate? No, Maniye told her. No, or not yet. Abruptly, Shiri was in front of her, walking backwards directly ahead of the girl, putting that grin in her face. Maybe I'll make him mine. She shot Asmander a look. Strong man, doesn't talk too much. I'll bet he'd fight, too, but not too much. Men like that, they like being broken. Enough! Asmander got out. She stared at him with exaggeratedly owlish eyes. Have I shocked the champion with my talk? Aim your barbs somewhere else! She smirked and slunk aside, letting Maniye stumble on. You're Broken Axe's champion now, are you? And you are very brave to mock a man who isn't here, he told her sharply, and caught a look of genuine hurt on her face for just a moment before she covered it.
Broken Axe is a man who says he will do a thing, and then does it. Not for gold or meat or favors, but because it must be done.
He surprised himself with those words. Before they came out, he had not realized how much the other man had impressed him.
If only the wolf had champions,
He thought. Shiri's face darkened, and no doubt she had a spectacular put-down ready on her tongue. But then Venator snarled, and a moment later he had coursed past them and into the trees, his low-slung shape glittering black with scales. Asmander stepped to the champion immediately, bearing black stone teeth, and Shiri was a hyena. Only Maniye remained on human feet, clutching her bronze knife. They heard the surprised yelp of something. Asmander didn't know the animals of this land well enough to guess, but Venator came slouching back to them soon enough. When he was stepped back, his face was frustrated.
just one,
He reported.
one, and fled.
One what? Asmander demanded.
The wolf?
Cat, Venator said.
Stripes, the other one.
And gone to fetch his friends, Shiri pointed out, since you let him get away. Venator gave her a sour look.
Maybe I wanted them to come and put an end to this stupid thing we're doing.
Girl, can you step? Asmander demanded. Maniye wouldn't meet his eyes. For a moment, he thought she would at least try, arms clutched about herself and teeth bared. Then she was shaking her head, and shaking all over.
Then we'd better keep going. We run, and hope Broken Axe is coming back for us.
Then it was just the hard march onwards, their pursuers devouring the distance towards them as inexorably as the sun kept sinking towards the horizon. That morning she had said her last words to Hesprick. The evening would bring the tiger. Maniye tried to keep her gaze focused before her, but the corners of her eyes betrayed her. The woods seemed full of fire-striped forms, the deepening dusk made tigers out of every shadow, and she was slowing all of them. I must trust to my souls, she thought. If she fell now, but if not now, then a mile later, unless she stepped. She reached inside of herself. She felt as though she was looking into one of those pits her father's people dug to keep prisoners in. At its base, the lean forms of her souls paced round and round, cramped by their captivity, snapping and snarling at each other, and at her.
Obey me or die,
Her souls seemed to say. But perhaps they wanted her dead, to part company with each other and fly free of her corpse. Then, from how far away she could not say, she heard a wolf give voice, high and lonely, at the moon. The Winter Runners, or just Mute Brothers? At the sound, the wolf within her leapt for freedom, and she stepped, or tried to step. Only the tiger began fighting her, clawing at her insides. She stumbled and fell, briefly sleek and gray-furred, then bruising her human bones again. She heard Venator curse her furiously, then Asmander had yanked her upright on her human feet.
go!
He said, but at the same time Shiri announced, They're here. A tiger leapt up before them, springing from the gathering dark to stand proud atop a rock. Another crouched on a tree trunk, while the spaces between the trees rustled with the passage of their bodies. How many? She could not know. For a moment, the tigers were coming for them, but then Shiri had dropped to 4 feet, and Asmander was the champion without warning, exploding into his terrible, alien shape right beside her so that she fell back from him. All the claws and scales and jagged teeth of him. Only Venator had retained his human form, a short-bladed club in one hand. He looked fearsome enough in any shape. Maniye saw the lead tiger abruptly turn its aborted lunge into a casual pacing. The Shadow Eaters were clearly not so sure how the souls of these foreigners would taste. And then Arachaka was standing right before them, resplendent in her bronze mail and her feather-crested helm. Maniye caught her eyes for a heartbeat, and saw regret there, but not enough to stop her leading the hunt. You have a thing of ours, she called out, and her warband padded all around them, never still, never clearly seen. Asmander was human again, toothed sword slanted over one shoulder.
She says you mean to kill her,
He observed.
She is claimed by the tiger.
Life is too short to go over everyone who has claimed her, Venator grunted. They all ignored him. The tiger priestess took a careful step forward.
Foreigner, do not make us paint our hands with your blood.
She sounded genuinely solicitous.
We have no grievance with your people.
Fair point, Venator nodded. Maniye felt the world beginning to tilt against her once more, to nobody's surprise. In the handful of heartbeats when there was still talking, not fighting, she reached inside herself again, facing the tortured eyes of the two beasts trapped within her. Wolf, carry me, or I will cut you away. With my last breath I shall so gladly to the tiger's mouth as one of his own. She sensed the snarl of canine teeth at that, the pain and the resentment. Shiri had stepped back now, if only because, if there was talking, she wanted her fair share.
Well, Longmouth, who speaks within you now? Your champion? Your father? The Axe One? The Serpent?
She was watching the shifting circle of the tigers close in on them imperceptibly. Tiger, let me ride the wolf, or I will cut you away. If Arachaka catches me, it shall be a wolf soul the tiger feasts on, Maniye thought. Was that even a threat? But she heard the yowling in her ears, the hiss of displeasure.
We fight!
Asmander declared flatly. He did not seem very happy about it.
We keep her from the tiger!
But why? Shiri asked. But then the ground shook, and something like a mountain cut loose from the ground had thundered out of the trees, bellowing its defiance, and dancing about its feet was a pale wolf with dark shoulders. Loud Thunder and Broken Axe had arrived. The tigers scattered, but in the next moment they were attacking, springing out from the darkness. One tried to leap on Loud Thunder's haunches, but he spun on the spot to face her, roaring, so that the tiger almost fell over her own feet trying to get out of the way. Instead, she met Venator, who did his level best to skin her alive with that short stone blade of his. Then there was another, a man of the tiger, leaping up on 4 feet to land before Maniye on two, a studded club cocked back to strike. She skipped aside from the blow, knife angled ready for the tiger dance, the fighting style of his priesthood. The sight of it gave him pause. The men did not learn that dance, but they feared it. Then Shiri had jumped from behind him and torn a ragged mouthful from his shoulder. The clearing was alive with leaping shadows. She heard the screech of Asmander's champion as it pounced into the midst of the tiger, scattering them, chasing them here and there. Loud Thunder was holding 2 or 3 off, the tiger's claws and knives not even managing to penetrate his hide. Broken Axe went rushing past her, pausing to snarl at her through bloodied fangs, and she knew it was time. She confronted the two beasts within her, reminded them of her dire threats, and stepped. For a moment they were rebellious, writhing stubbornly in her grip, but then she had forced her will on them, her blood hot with the violence of the moment. Stepping, she followed after Broken Axe, her nose telling her instantly that the sharp, alien scent of Asmander was on her other side as they dashed into the tree line. Behind her, she heard the weird heckling cry of Shiri, that hunting call of a distant land cackling out of the darkness. Almost immediately, the reek of tiger was strong and close in her nose. She veered away, unseeing but hearing the sudden rush of it as it tried to ambush her. A moment later, the dark shape bolted out behind her, raking at her flanks but falling short, hissing a challenge. A thing from Nightmare dropped onto the tiger, leaping so high that it seemed to fall out of the branches above. Asmander's curved claws ripped in, but Maniye heard the splintering of ribs simply under the force of his landing. Then the tiger were on their trail in earnest. The woods seemed full of them, with brief ember-bright glimpses of their striped bodies, their moon-gleaming eyes. The fear that hammered within her was the wolf's generations-old terror of the shadow eaters who came to devour their souls. Asmander was gone now. She had no sense of when, just that something had dragged him away. Then she was battling her way through denser trees, swerving and scrabbling, knowing that Broken Axe was off to her right and getting more distant. In a sudden panic, surrounded by that peopled darkness, She stepped to her tiger shape to climb and leap, hoping to make better time through the tangle, trying to break out into the open where her wolf speed would count. It was a mistake. In that moment of change, her souls clashed inside her, ripping at one another, and she tumbled over, shocked onto two human feet, jarring hard off a tree trunk and landing on her knees. When she looked up, she was not alone. The sight of the woman who had come so far to kill her hurt like a wound inside her, one that would not close. Jolpe, strength in moonlight, mother. The Tiger Queen looked down on her. The curved blade was in her hand, but for just that moment she made no move to use it. Around them the woods seemed abruptly quiet, as though both of them had been abandoned by their allies. I will not go with you, Maniye told her. Jolpe nodded, and then one foot slid back, and she was in her fighting stance, ready for the dance of tigers. Maniye felt herself fall into a mirroring pose, but there was a cold blade of fear in her, because to fight she needed her souls, and she could not say if either would answer her call right then. Jolpe was moving as soon as she had made her stand, bronze edge flickering towards in curved paths through the darkness, so that it was more an idea in Maniye's mind than a sight in her eyes. She let the shape of her mother's body tell her where the knife would go next, slipping aside into a crouching pose and bringing her own blade up in an arc that would have driven it into the other woman's armpit if she had stayed still. Jolpe made the smallest shift to her footing, Maniye's point missing her by an inch that might just as well have been an arm's length, while Jolpe's own blade drew a long red line down the girl's arm. And even as Maniye stepped back, stabbing at throat height with a hand slick with her own blood, her mother became a tiger, springing even as she stepped. She launched herself under Maniye's strike, knocking her smaller prey off her feet and slamming down on her. The bruising pain of it seemed to knock Maniye's mind askew even as the breath was driven from her. She was clawing and biting furiously at the big cat atop her, snapping with a wolf's yellow teeth, digging in hooked tiger claws, digging in with the point of her blade, even as she fought to keep Jolpe's own jaws away from her. She stepped and stepped, swift and uncontrolled as a spring flood, her fluid form denying her enemy a target. Then her mother was knocked away with a yowl of surprise, as another of her people bowled into her, his fur bloody. Venator's reptile shape uncoiled from the dark in chase, saw-toothed jaws tearing open the injured tiger's entire flank. Then the pirate had bloated into his human shape, kneeling over the tiger man with hand upraised before driving his razor-edged blade down, three hacking blows to butcher the beast with no mercy given. When he stood again, gory implement in hand, his eyes were on Jolpe. His grin looked like death. Maniye fled, though right then she was not sure who she was fleeing from. She hit the ground on wolf paws, hoping that her mother would take up the southerner's challenge. She did not. Instead, she was pounding after her true target, and Venator, for all his fearsome skill, could not keep up with them. But Maniye was faster. Allow her 20 breaths of clear running, and she must pull ahead of Jolpe. 10 breaths, and no more conflict within her, or even all of that was tangled in her mind when Jolpe leapt at her and caught her a raking blow down her haunches. The pain seared through Maniye and she stumbled, losing her speed, lurching desperately to get back onto her feet again. The tiger was off balance, too, her lunge overextending her. One more time, Maniye fled. Then there was a new shape coursing alongside her. Broken Axe keeping pace with effort, with blood in his teeth and down his sides. Something passed between them, an understanding, and if she had the time to take human shape, she would have told him not to do it. But he was already turning, stepping into a man with his axe drawn back. She heard the hissing scream of a woman as the iron blade bit, shocked out of her tiger form by the sheer pain. Not her mother, which meant that she had slowed down without meaning to, waiting for Broken Axe, and that was when Jolpe caught up with her. Maniye saw only a flurry out of the dark, and then she had thrown herself aside, a leap the wolf was not capable of, so that she landed on her hands and knees, rolling and kicking to try and get up, her knife lost, even as her mother approached. The hot breath of the tiger was on Maniye, and she froze, reaching for any other form but the helpless, naked one she had been born to. The Tiger Queen was a shape of fire-splashed darkness, her eyes seeming to glow from within. Then she was a woman once more, her knife leveled at Broken Axe as he returned. "Why?" Jolpe asked him. "For the same reason I saved you from the wolf, because it is right. Will you not honor my judgment?" There was a battle on Jolpe's face just then, but she lost it when another pair of tigers slunk out to stand beside her, one limping, and the other with a torn ear. "For all I owe you, you were too late," she told Broken Axe. "You cannot heal the scars they left, and she is just one more scar." Something stayed her, though. Her history with Broken Axe allowed Maniye 2 more breaths. The tiger was fierce behind Jolpe's eyes, but the eyes were human still, somehow penning it in. Not for Maniye. She would not defy her god for something as trivial as her daughter. She wanted Broken Axe to flee now, though. She did not want his blood on her claws, his soul in her teeth. Then Asmander stepped out, a shadow from the shadows, smudged darker with blood here and there, and his sword jagged with missing teeth.
"We're leaving now,"
He announced to the world, his voice ragged with weariness, but still trying to sound light and mocking.
"Let the tiger fill its belly elsewhere."
Jolpe's face twisted, and she stepped, snarling. But Asmander met her shape for shape. The ear-splitting screech of the champion tore through the forest, sending the Tiger Queen skittering backwards. Axe's hand yanked at Maniye's shoulder, and then they had seized the opportunity the Southerner had given them, making a straight line through the trees, away from Jolpe, and hoping there were no more tigers lying in wait. Asmander caught up with them moments later, those long reptile strides easily outpacing them. By then, Maniye's reserve of strength was almost gone. Since the 3 of them had set off to rescue Hesprick, it felt as though she had never stopped running. Axe was stumbling too, and she did not know how much of the blood that painted his pelt was his own. Asmander kept in front of them, leading them, guiding them down slope, darting between trees. Of the others, of Loud Thunder, or Shiri, or Venator, there was no sign. Maniye realized a moment later that Axe was straying further from her. "Don't go back to fight them," she pleaded inside her head. That seemed just the sort of thing that either of the men would do. She felt that, if she was left on her own, she would simply collapse, that only their presence was pushing her on. But Axe was not heading away. He was coming back now, trying to reach her, but Asmander was in the way. Asmander was hurting her, pushing close, rushing her ahead. When Axe got too close, the champion snapped at him. In the midst of her headlong flight, Maniye could not work out what was happening. There was a scent on the wind, a familiar one that spoke of hearths and food, so that she found at last a cupful of strength to push her onwards. It was a testament to how tired she was that the smell of home seemed reassuring to her, the smell of the winter runners and the wolf. She realized too late. Even as the jolt of fear shot through her, gray bodies were passing on either side of her. She heard a yelp and a snarl from Broken Axe, but there were 2 or 3 wolf hunters between him and Maniye already. She turned, trying to reach him, but there was Asmander, in the form of the indomitable champion, shrieking into her face, driving her away. And then he was human, his stone-toothed blade still in hand, calling out,
"Broken Axe! Run! Run now!"
Maniye tried to do that just herself, but Smiles Without Teeth was on her already, powering her to the root-knotted ground and digging his teeth at her neck, trying to force her to change form. She thought she heard Broken Axe shout her name, but there were half a dozen wolves roiling around her already, and more vanishing into the dark to look for him. One of the pack was straightening up, casting off its pelt and its hide and taking on the much worse guise of her father. Right now, though, those familiar and hated eyes were not on her. They were fixed on the Southerner.
"So,"
Spoke Akrit Stone River.
"you will remember our words in the stone place?"
Asmander spat out tiredly.
"You had killed another chief inside the circle, but you had lost her. This was what you wanted." "You take a long time to honor your bargains," Stone River told him. "But honor them I do, and you will find me the iron wolves my lord needs, the invulnerable warriors of the north."
Hesprick, Maniye felt all of her grief and loss anew, because this was why Asmander had been traveling behind her. And then he must have met with Hesprick, his messenger, the man he respected and followed without question. And then Hesprick had passed on. She had saved the old man from her father, but not from time or cold. And Asmander must have been left wondering, then, where his path led. And he owed her nothing. He had not journeyed all the way from his far homeland just to chase around after a mongrel girl.
I will be High Chief as soon as the Moon Eaters recognize me, and you shall have your warriors,
Stone River replied carefully.
There will be many young hunters eager to prove themselves. Why should I not see your homeland and taste its joys? I am Stone River. I keep my bargains.
And Asmander should have looked triumphant, Maniye thought. He should have been delighted at himself for outwitting all the crown of the world to thus win his prize. But, instead, he only looked sick, either at the world or at himself, and he nodded as though he was accepting a punishment. And so concludes chapter 37 of The Tiger and the Wolf. Absolutely brutal. So, Asmander, this entire time, was only following Maniye around because way back in time, when he watched Akrit Stone River fight the other wolf to become High Chief, or what he believes will bring him a High Chief, Asmander must have struck a deal then, saying he would catch Maniye for Akrit if Akrit agreed to give him the Iron Wolves his father, back home in the Sun River Nation, was requesting. So that's absolutely awful. Asmander just betrayed her completely. Like she said, though, Asmander owed her nothing. Technically, they had no bonds. They were only bound together by Hesprick, and when Hesprick died, well, Asmander betrayed her and turned her over to the wolves. So, it turns out that Maniye is back in her father's clutches, so we will have to see how that turns out. Now, of course, Maniye has learned some interesting things about the tiger that Akrit does not yet know. So, let's see what happens as we proceed with chapter 38. She had slept. In the end, sheer anxiety had not been enough, and exhaustion had overpowered it. When she awoke, she was within a tent space built around a tree, sheets of hide stretched out over the lowest branches to give the temporary dwelling a shape. She had half expected them to string her up, as they had with Hesprick, but, instead, there was just a collar and a thick braid of rawhide that led to a stake of iron dug into the ground. It represented wealth, that stake. Enough iron to make 4 or 5 knives or a couple of axe heads. She was being treated as a thing of value, but as a thing nonetheless. Asmander had betrayed her, but then Asmander had never been loyal to her. The reversal still hurt her, though. She was the center of her own world, after all. She had not stopped to think that she was only peripheral to the lives of others. For a moment, when they had all been together running the Tiger's Gauntlet, she had seen them as some kind of hero band out of the stories. Bear, wolf, and exotic foreigners bound together by mutual respect to triumph over all comers. But that had been a foolish thought, and if she had not been so young, she would not have entertained it. Time to grow up, she thought. And to grow up, she must cast aside childish things, such as having 2 souls. Trapped in her human form and unable to favor or discipline either of them, she felt them pace about within her. She was her own cage, and they were her prisoners, forced into a proximity that neither could live with. She felt a desperate need to return to childhood. It seemed to her now a carefree time of freedom, when she and the different sides of her nature had lived together in harmony and joy. I cannot choose, she told the world. I am both. If I was only one, I would be just half of what I am. How can I be asked to choose? As if summoned by her words, Akrit shouldered his way through the flap of the tent and paused to survey her. He loomed large in her memory, but, right now, he seemed even larger.
There you are,
He told her, as though he had simply mislaid her for a moment, rather than chasing her all across the crown of the world. She stared at him sullenly, and he sat down cross-legged before her, even smiling just as if this was a much-sought meeting of old friends.
I've lost a lot in chasing you. he told her almost jovially. I've had warriors killed by the tiger, and you've turned a broken axe from me too. If you liked him so much, you could have had him. I told you that.
Still, she said nothing, shuffling away from him until her leash pulled taut, her back against the sagging hide of the tent.
What?
He asked her quite frankly. Her fear seemed to baffle him. Why? She whispered. Why go so far? I am grown. I am not tied to your hearth.
You are of my blood, and I have a use for you, he explained patiently. You are a tool of mine, a thing that I brought into being when I had your mother, and I need you to fulfill my destiny.
Destiny? She echoed.
Take's Iron is sure that there is a destiny at work. There are strange things happening in the world. Can you deny it? All the people of the crown of the world feel a change, like winter. And you were at the stones. You know what happened there. A great destiny has come to the world, and it is mine.
It's not mine, she got out.
You are its, he told her. You are a part of it, a tiger and a wolf child, and my only child. Who could doubt that the world meant for you such a purpose?
She stared at him. At first, she could not even imagine what he was talking about. So much had happened to her since that night. His smile was encouraging, though. It invited her to meet it with one of her own, though she refused to. He rose in one smooth motion, rolling his shoulders and stretching.
You will do what you are told, he said mildly. When you leave me again, it will be to do my bidding. You will see this is the right thing to do. But you were ever a slow child, and disobedient.
He loomed over her, and she saw the glint of a knife in his hand. When he hauled her up, she thought he would cut her, but he just sawed at the laces of her shift until he had stripped the clothes off her back.
Even grown, he told her. You are still a child in your mind, so you must be made to serve.
And he had dropped her and taken up something that had been lying near the tent flap, something she had not noticed before, a thin switch of birch.
I want you to recite back to me what I say, he told her.
His hand sent the switch keening through the air, not touching her yet, but the mere sound sending a rush of fear through her.
You will speak it back, and back, and back, until it is from your own mind you are speaking. Let us start with something simple. You will obey your father in all things.
Even terrified, she scowled at him.
Yes, I had thought that would be hard for you to do. It always was, and I was too soft before. I did not see how you would grow, or else I would have been firmer. Tell me. I will obey my father in all things.
Even as she was deciding to resist him, he struck her. The thin line of the whip seared across her arm and back and sent her to the floor, not with the force of it, but with the pain. The thin wood of the whip had been split, and stones braided into it. A single lash stung like a dozen bees.
Tell me,
He said again, and still in that terribly calm voice. Not at all like him, in fact. This was Stone River possessed by his own destiny. She would have spoken, but the sudden agony of the blow had driven her voice from her, and so he struck her again, laying down a second wheel across her back. This time she shrieked, no words, but somehow he read in that sound the confirmation he was looking for. Perhaps he was not wrong to do so.
again.
He said, and drew back the lash. When she bared her teeth at him, he put twice the force into his next blow, hard enough to splinter the whip against her, leaving her sobbing and hunched in upon herself. Stone River sighed with mild exasperation, and went to fetch another whip. She had already seen that there were half a dozen lying there in the shadows of the tent's edge.
Now,
He began. I will! Please, I will! Broke from her lips. She had not meant to say it, had not wanted to, but the traitor words got out somehow and hung in the air between them.
well now,
He said, plainly pleased, and swished the new whip through the air, getting a feel for it.
tell me now how you will go to the tiger for me.
She stared at him, because plainly he was mad. But, of course, he could not know all those bitter things that had happened since she had last escaped him. I can't, she said into the silence. And when he raised the switch, she went on, I can't! I can't! It doesn't work! I can't go to them!
You will go to the tiger, he said with more force. You will tell them who your mother was. I know how they are ruled. They cannot but make you their leader, because you are the blood of their last one. That is the way of the tiger. Everyone knows that.
And then it came to her, even as the lash rose again, that she had found the limits of him, the walls that hedged his mind. For this was what he had been told of the tiger, and he had never questioned it or tried to find out more about it. His ignorance was his hearth, and he had never explored the darkness beyond. And he struck her again, and raised another torn stripe on her human skin, and, although the leash restrained her physically, whatever had held her back inside now snapped. She screamed then, but she was screaming defiance at him. I have been to the tiger! The tiger want me dead because I am yours! My mother lives and rules them, and she will not accept me as her daughter, nor would I be yours. But you will never rule the tiger through me, because they reject me. They will eat my flesh and my soul if I fall within their power one more time. He had brought the whip up for another strike, but now he was frozen, staring at her.
Alive?
He hissed. And then he did break free from his enclosed ignorance, leaping from stone to stone in his mind until he spat out, Broken axe! Seeing past the man's recent betrayal to that far greater one. He was never yours, she hissed at him. He was always his own, and I will not be yours either. It was as if, somehow, her mind and her mouth had forgotten the whip and the pain, just for that moment. But Akrit did not strike again. This much she could say for him. Within the little domain of his thoughts, he was no fool. Already he was planning.
You will serve me,
He said, whether to her or to the world, she could not say. The switch was lowered. Akrit's eyes narrowed.
There is a destiny. I tore out Water Gather's throat in the ring of stones, and the spirits stooped low about us, watching. You ran beneath their gaze, too, that day. Or you are marked by them, as am I, marked for great things, or for a great doom. So I must show the wolf I am worthy, and to do so, I must use what the world has given me.
His gaze rested on her again.
It has given me you.
Have you never thought, she got out, that perhaps we just did those things, and the spirits don't care? He struck her 3 times with the full force of his arm, though his hatred and anger, which would have made the blows a real terror, were concentrated elsewhere, considering his next move. Once she lay twitching and whimpering before him, though, he barely seemed to notice her, departing again, already calling for his priest. Maniye was left to herself after that, in a gloom that seemed lit up by the burning stripes Akrit had laid across her back. She could hear exchanges about the camp, sometimes a snap and snarl of disagreement, once what sounded like a full-scale skirmish between 2 of them. Akrit's warband was fraying. They had come this far with him, and they had been bloodied by the tiger, and now they must be looking to their leader and wondering. Some would be thinking of challenge. Who would be the first? Smiles without teeth was too loyal. Shatter's Oak was a woman, but others would be asking themselves if their own time had come. The wait seemed to go on forever, any sense of time's passing taken from her, without the sky to mark it. The hurt from her whipping dulled, like embers dimming but never quite extinguished. She slept a little, but fitfully, then was awoken by her father's voice barking loudly outside the tent. He was giving orders, rousing the warband to move. Shortly after, a pair of hunters came in and uprooted the metal stake between them, not looking at her. She could have named them both, but they were working very hard at pretending that they could not see her, even as they hauled her out at the end of her leash. The wolves decamped so quickly that Maniye guessed the tigers were still stalking somewhere nearby. She had a feeble hope then, for if they were to move at full pace, surely they must run as wolves and free her to do the same. Then she would seize the first chance she had, and she would be gone from them, trusting to her feet once again. A moment's thought told her it could not happen. They had baggage with them, hides and tents and provisions, and loot from the Boer village. They had a pair of travois that they bundled their burdens on, to be hauled by the younger hunters. Of the rest, many did step, running ahead or falling away to either side to keep an eye and a nose ready for any enemy, leaving a handful to stay with Maniye and the baggage, led by Smiles without teeth. Smiles stooped low to speak in her ear, putting her in his shadow.
Stone River says he wants you to live, for now, he told her. But he says, if she runs, break her leg.
His dark eyes pinned her.
I asked him, why not do that now? No running then. But he says there's too much we need to carry already. But I will. Give me the chance, girl, and I will.
She fully intended to meet his ugly gaze, but the deep rumble of his voice pitched itself right to the fear in her mind, and she could not. He took her leash himself, his hand almost eclipsing the metal stake. Her wounds were dressed roughly, leaving her feeling as though they had lit a fire on her back. Then they headed westwards, away from the tiger, and there was no talking between them. Despite their loads, Akrit's warband set a swift pace, further reinforcing Mani's suspicion and that the tiger were not keeping to their own places now. She thought, "And I have caused that somehow. I am a weapon so fierce that my mother cannot let her enemies grasp me. I am the spark that sets the fire." But that was merely a sop to her own vanity. Even helpless, she was trying to spin a tale that gave her some sense of control. She had been swept before the rush of events like broken wood in the river during the spring thaw. Akrit dropped back occasionally. He would encourage Smiles to keep up the pace, but his eyes were ever on Maniye. When they camped that night, the stake was hammered in again, but she lay out in the open, surrounded by wolves on all sides, without any true camp being pitched. Several of the warriors had been sent ahead. My father has a plan, she thought. Sometime during that same night, she woke into a darkness relieved only by the fire's last embers and a sliver of cloudy moon. A man stood over her, and she recoiled, assuming it must be her father. Then, for a mad moment, she thought it was Broken Axe, for it lacked Stone River's broad bulk. This was an older man, though, shorter and leaner, and one she should have known sooner. Calameshly takes iron. She was not going to speak at first, although he must know she was awake. He just watched and watched, though, and at last she got out, You must be very happy, Takes Iron. You were right all along. I am no true daughter of the wolf.
Nor of the tiger yet.
His voice startled her, for she had not expected an answer.
You were wolf enough when you were caught.
Your chief is a fool, she said softly, wondering if any other was too awake to hear. He needs me to be a wolf, so as to be his own, yet he thinks the tiger would follow me if I was not a tiger.
He has cherished some dreams a long time.
Takes Iron did not say too long, and yet it was there between his words. Maniye frowned, because she had never heard him even come close to criticizing her father. The tiger will not have me anyway, no matter how much tiger I am, she added bitterly.
I think your father understands as much,
He agreed. His eyes had never left her, and she felt a crawling sense of unease born of that rigid scrutiny. Then what? She hissed. She saw Kalameshli's shoulders rise and fall. His thoughts are close about him now.
The eyes of the wolf.
She made an exasperated noise, because Akrit himself had told her all that, and it gave her no clues as to what her father would actually do. In the wake of that, she heard someone nearby stirring, woken by her frustration. Kalameshli melted away into the dark silently, and, in the morning, she was not sure she believed any of it. They traveled 2 more days, moving with all the speed the travois could manage, swapping bearers and scouts, and never giving Maniye the least chance to escape. When Smiles was not holding her leash, the job fell to Shatter's Oak, the other veteran amongst them. She was a worse captor, if anything. Smiles without teeth was a man of little imagination, and able to plod along in silence for hours without growing bored or fretful. Amiens Shatter's Oak had a harsher streak to her. Even if Maniye had not killed her son, she had still been there, connected to that death by a trail of blood. Amiens would yank on the lead viciously, hauling Maniye close, her teeth almost to the prisoner's ear. When we catch Broken Axe, we're going to skin him, she would hiss. Kalameshli says he has spat on the wolf, so his ghost can't be allowed to leave his body. We're going to wear his human pelt and leave his flesh for the coyotes. He'll never come back as a wolf or a man. From her first sally, she had realized that simply threatening Maniye herself with pain or death would barely register, Akrit having already run her to exhaustion on that front. Instead, she noticed the flinch when she first brought up Maniye's ally. He will come, she had crowed. He'll come for you, do you think? I'll be waiting. When he's ours, I'll wield the knife myself. I'll beg Kalameshli for the chance. I am owed, girl. We'll roast him alive on the fire and feed you his human flesh. She was endlessly inventive in the fates that they had in store for their former kinsman. Each of them whispered viciously into Maniye's ear. It was a pastime the woman never tired of. At last they stopped, because they had caught up with the hunters Akrit had sent ahead. They had been crossing open land, following a young river's descent out of the highlands and onwards west, but there were more trees ahead. Maniye had lost all track of where they were. Without her wolf nose, she felt disconnected by so much traveling. At the edge of the trees and in the crook of the river, a fire was already going, and the hunters had not been idle. There was a mess of wood there, and they were building something too small and irregular for a dwelling. When the travois party arrived, Kalameshli took himself off to view it immediately, mostly to berate them, and have them dismantle much of it. They had been hunting, too, because there was a pit dug and within it a sow and a boar were pacing angrily, leaping up at their captors whenever a human face showed itself. At first, Maniye feared she would be thrown in there, too. Instead, the big tent shelter they had originally kept her in was reassembled here, and she was leashed inside, kept blind to what was going on without. Her ignorance lasted only until nightfall, for most of which time she had simply lain there, feeling the ache in her legs and feet, the taut tugging of the welts across her back, not even trying to uproot the stake. Kalameshli's voice came to her, calling instructions peevishly, and the harsh shout of Akrit when something went wrong. If anything, the tension between the wolves was spun tauter than ever. Maniye had been desperately looking for any sign that someone was getting close to standing up to her father, for surely any challenger would have no particular interest in her fate. Yet Stone River's reputation still held them in check. Then, once the noise and mutter outside had died down into uneasy sleep, Akrit and Kalameshli backed into the tent. The priest glanced at her once, her father not at all.
2 pigs are no sacrifice,
Akrit stated. He had brought a brand with him, and he jammed it into the ground for its light.
The scouts say the only people close to here are the horse, who they fear to touch. Well, they are wise, Kalameshli murmured. If we are to war against the tiger, we would be fools to seek more enemies. The horse are dangerous, not because they have many warriors, but because they have many friends. All this I know, Stone River cut him off sharply. So, not even a hunter of the deer or some bear woman are looking out for mushrooms. Then you know the answer to your question.
And Kalameshli's eyes slid inexorably to Maniye, sitting up and staring at them.
This is also unwise, he observed. I have asked you for wisdom, but your well has run dry, Akrit told him flatly. I can feel the wolf's breath on my neck, old man. He is waiting for me to prove myself to him. I need to show him that in me are all the qualities he values, that I am fierce and strong. I balk at nothing. There are other qualities that the wolf values. Loyalty to kin.
Kalameshli started, trying to sound mild, but the strain in his voice betrayed him.
Yes, loyalty, Akrit interrupted. And she has shown none. So she deserves none. She fled the tribe. She stole meat from the wolf's own jaws. She has been the guest of the Shadow Eaters. The wolf must be hungering for her.
Kalameshli glanced at her, the fire catching his eyes.
Akrit, as I am your friend, this is not the way. She will be given to the wolf.
What Maniye felt was some terrible variant of relief. Her fears had come to pass. The nightmare that had chased her all the way from the village of the Winter Runners had caught up with her. Outside the tent, they had been building an altar, jaws of wood in imitation of the iron teeth of home. They would burn her inside them, and the wolf would consume her. But Kalameshli continued shaking his head.
She is your kin, he insisted. No god will protect a kinslayer. Is this what you will have the wolf see?
Akrit even smiled at that.
But I will not be a kinslayer, because you are my priest, and you shall carry the flame.
The older man's face went dead in an instant, utterly without expression.
It, it cannot be done,
He said quietly.
You'll do it, Akrit told him. As I am your chief, you will do it. Because the winter runners need me, takes iron. I will make us first of all the tribes, and I will make the wolf the first of all the peoples. It starts here with this. This is how I show the wolf what I dare. This is how you show the wolf your loyalty. Don't think he isn't watching you as well.
Kalameshli would have argued further, but Akrit abruptly grabbed him by the robe, yanking him forwards in a clatter of little bones.
Do not challenge me!
Stone River growled into the old man's face, and then dropped him, the old priest falling to his knees. A moment later, Akrit had stomped out of the tent, the parting of the hide flap giving Maniye a glimpse of the flames outside. Kalameshli got to his feet and stood there for a long time, long after the brand had burned out, thinking in the darkness, and then he too left. Wow, that concludes chapter number 38. So, Akrit has Maniye in his hands once more, thanks to Asmander's betrayal, and they're loping off in some direction, trying to go home, presumably. And now Akrit gets this wild idea, since Maniye won't actually be able to help with the tiger problem, since the tigers won't accept her, and she's kind of useless to him at that point. He wants to sacrifice her, so he has decided that he's going to kill her, and Kalameshli Takes Iron, the priest, is going to be the one to do it. Wow! So things are not looking so good for Maniye. Everyone's out to get her, she has no friends anymore, and now her own father would like to sacrifice her to the jaws of the wolf. Yikes! So, yeah, we're gonna take a break there and pick up again next week, Friday, at noon. So make sure you tune in and see what happens next. It's getting pretty spicy. All right. So I will see you all again next week. And until then, enjoy your weekend. Bye now.